of all, just make sure that your microphones are muted, just because we want to avoid any crosstalk or echo or anything like that. And we are going to be recording this session just so that we can use it for other people who may be on shift or aren't available to be in attendance today. So again, good afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. My name's Robert Kidd. I think I've met most of you, and most of you probably even been through a code of conduct training with me before. And even though that may be the case, I just want to let you know that this is going to be a very different training. This is a different way of presenting this material, a different way of doing code of conduct training, and one that I hope you'll find is engaging and timely, because with everything that's been going on over the past year and all of the disruptions and things that have been taking up our bandwidth, this training is really intended to recenter us and refocus on the fact that everything that we do as a representative of the county has an ethical consequence or a component to it. And just to remind ourselves that all of us as county employees, as representatives of the county, we make a statement each and every day that we decide to show up and accept the paycheck. And we make a statement about the county's reputation. And so we're going to be talking this afternoon more about issues related to culture and leadership and stewardship, and really what I call the sort of aspirational components that are written down in our code of conduct. So while I'm presenting, in a moment, I'm going to turn off my camera and bring up the PowerPoint slides. But if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to type those into the chat box. Rachel in the office is going to be monitoring that. And so if anyone has a question or comment, she can, and we can address it in the moment. And these sessions have been going approximately an hour and a half or so, just depends on how long people want to talk and so forth. So we'll take a break about midway through, take about a 5-minute break, just because I know it's tough to sit in one place for an extended period of time. Then we'll come back and do the second session. But before we take the break, we'll ask people if they want to go ahead and unmute their microphones to feel free to do so, and we can talk at that point. And so I think that is all of the preliminaries. Just so you know, this is part of the mandatory code of conduct trainings that everybody's required to have every other year. So you will get credit for your attendance in this session. And so just one last time as a reminder, just make sure that your microphones are muted. I'm looking at the list, and Marcella, I think maybe your microphone isn't muted. So just check that if you could, please. Again, just so we can avoid any sort of echo or background noise. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my microphone, and I'm going to bring up the slide deck here. So hopefully you all can see that. Can you see the slides okay? Okay, great. So as you can see, the title of this presentation this afternoon is called Creating an Ethical Culture Through Leadership. And as I mentioned, this is going to be a different type of training, and we're really going to do more of a deep dive into the principles behind what's contained in the Code of Conduct rather than going page by page through the code itself. Although having said that, along with the Evite that you should have received for this training, there should have been attached to it a copy of the county's Code of Conduct. A few things to say about it here in a moment. We do this every time, though, just to make sure that everyone has a copy so that they can use it for reference purposes in the future. Contact information on this slide. As many people have been during the past year, we've been working remotely now for a year, but the contact information with regards to the phone number is still good. The phone number here, and also an Outlook for both myself and Rachel, we're hooked up to RingCentral, so you can always contact us that way as well. Compliance at burnco.gov is another way that we can connect with one another. So I mentioned the county's Code of Conduct, and the only thing that I want to emphasize for folks during these trainings is the fact, and to remind people, that the county's code is an ordinance. It is county law, and it has a pretty broad reach. It really covers anyone who's in a representative capacity of the county. So that includes not only county employees, but also elected officials, candidates for county office, our contractors and vendors, and volunteers who are appointed to boards and commissions by the county commission. So it really sets out the expectations and the behaviors that are expected of anyone who is standing in a place where they are going to be making a statement about the county as an organization. And as I'm sure you're all aware, because we've worked with many of you throughout the years, one of the things that the code did was it created our office, which is the compliance office. And over the 8 years or so that we've been in existence, we've really tried to expand our services to a degree that not only do we provide trainings such as we're doing this afternoon, but also we process complaints to be heard by the Code of Conduct Review Board. And really, we've tried to make sure that everyone understands that we are intended to be a resource for all county employees, to try to open up channels of communication, to try to answer questions when we can. And even if it's something that doesn't directly deal with our office or our decision-making capacity, we try to put people on a path to try to find some answers and try to seek resolutions. Because when we can solve issues before they spiral and escalate to either a complaint or a grievance or something like that, when we can resolve things at the lowest possible level, and I think you would agree, the county's in a better position overall, because now we're in a place where we're actually providing that circle of support, if you will, to make the environment and the culture a little bit better. So this language on the slide that I just brought up is actually drawn directly from the code. And it makes a couple of important points that I think are going to be the launch point for everything else that I want to discuss this afternoon. And so the first paragraph here really talks about how all of us, public servants is the term that they use, have a duty and an obligation to carry out our responsibilities as county employees with the primary interest being the public's mission or the public's interest rather than any of our own personal interests or considerations. And this gets reflected in several different sections of the code, including things like conflicts of interest, prohibited bidding and contracting, improper influence, all sorts of areas that are really designed to address the issue and making sure that those resources that are uniquely given to us as county employees, that are entrusted to us by the public, are used in a proper manner that does forward the public's interest. And then the second section here, I always like to focus on this sort of last part here, which talks about how each of us as public servants has the duty or the obligation to treat the public and each other with respect, concern, and responsiveness. Now, if you think about that statement just for a moment, I think it really covers both sides of the equation. It talks about not only how we treat the public, and we get lots of instruction and coaching on that sort of thing, but also how are we treating each other? And the focus of the presentation this afternoon is going to be really on what do we do on a daily basis that impacts the way those around us act and behave, and to what degree do we take seriously our obligations as county employees? Because I understand that we're all working for the county, but we may not all be best friends with one another. But nevertheless, are we still treating each other with the respect and the professionalism and the dignity that everyone within the county is entitled to? So let's start talking about this notion of culture. And every office, every department has a culture. And really on its own, the word culture is neither a positive nor a negative. It just is the way things are, the way we do things on a daily basis. But let me suggest that culture is something that we need to be mindful of because this is our bridge to relevance. And if you think about it, this bridge that is made up, that creates our culture, is made up of all of these bricks. And these bricks are comprised of data points. And the data points are our daily actions, decisions, behaviors that hold this bridge. And the question that I've been posing to people is, with regards to our daily practices and our shared beliefs, are we making that journey just a little bit more enjoyable for everyone? And by everyone, that again includes not just the public, but those around us, our coworkers, our managers, the people we interact with on a daily basis. Are we operating in a way that is being supportive of them and of our mission and of our operations or not? Because I truly believe that we need to use culture as our bridge to relevance. So if we want to think about the county as being a successful organization, we need to think of it in a way that asks, are we acting in a way that inspires one another, that builds each other up, that supports one another, as opposed to spiraling down into these negative mindsets? And I really think it is critical and crucial for those folks who find themselves in a management or a supervisory role to be in touch, to understand the vibe of how the people who report to us are actually operating. And, I've worked in local government now for the better part of a quarter century, and I've worked for several public agencies throughout the state. And it's been my experience that there are times when departments or offices, their morale may go up or down. And the reasons for these peaks and valleys can be varied. There can be a lot of different factors at play here, but I think it is incumbent upon management to notice these things and to figure out how they are going to intervene and intercede to change these unsuccessful mindsets, if you will, the ones that just want to hate or blame or complain about one another, to that of being a successful employee. What do we do to encourage and inspire those around us? And we're really going to do a deep dive this afternoon in these concepts of how we can adopt practices that I think we all can appreciate, and those people throughout our lives that we have considered to be good leaders or managers. So when we talk about a culture of trust, we're talking about an organization where every needs to take responsibility for their ethics. And those of you, who've heard me talk before, know that when I talk about ethics in the workplace, ethics in government, I'm not just talking about what are the rules. Now, the rules are important, whether it be policies, laws, code of conduct, all of those things are important. They set the baseline. They set the platform for our behaviors. But sometimes, and I think most ethicists would agree, true ethical conduct occupies all that space that goes beyond the written rules, that actually talks about not only are we following the rules, but are these things that we do, these decisions that we make, these actions that we take, the words that we use, are they going to survive public scrutiny? And are they publicly defensible? So much of what we do in our office is talking about not just what do the rules say, what does the code say, but also what's the appearance of these actions or decisions that you're contemplating? Because if it just doesn't feel right, there's probably something to that. And I think these are timely things to be discussing right now because, as I mentioned, I've worked in government for a lot of years, and I feel like right now, more than at any other time in my career, government employees, and we can talk about government employees at any level, are under the microscope, under scrutiny, more than I have ever seen in the past. And I think there can be a lot of reasons for that because of things that have happened, not only with regards to the pandemic, but also the heightened concerns and discussion about racial and social injustice in this country, the elections, the events of January, even the tragic events of a couple of weeks past. I mean, all of these things cause people to turn their attention more keenly on our government agencies and on our government employees. And so that's why I'm going to have a a lot to say about the way we treat one another is going to be reflective of how the county is perceived as an organization. So let's get into this a little bit more deeply. What is organizational culture? As we mentioned, it is those shared values, principles, just ways of doing things. But these are important considerations because these are going to influence the way other people within our groups, within our offices are going to act. And so the challenge is, are we making sure that our traditions, our ways of doing things are in line with all of those aspirations that we talked about in that first slide that involved fulfilling our duties as public servants in a way that's forwarding the public's mission and treating each other with respect, concern, and responsiveness. Because when we align those things, the way we actually do things and what the code says we should be doing, then we are becoming, I think, a more relevant organization, and we are being more supportive of the county and its overall goals. Because these things matter. You know this. I think many of you have been around for quite a few years, and you know that the culture within our offices, within our departments, is going to make a difference with regards to how people treat one another and really how they treat their positions as county employees. But it's going to create this common perception. And right now, I think the county is at a critical juncture with regards to establishing our cultures, our behavioral norms, because we're about to embark upon a significant change in our workforce. And I'll talk a bit about that here in a moment. But what's the purpose of culture? Well, it helps people to become integrated within our offices and with our groups, and it's going to teach them how to relate and how to work effectively together. And on the right side of this slide here, you can see some of the effects that culture can have. Culture can determine how we communicate with one another. And as I've been doing these trainings now for the past year, since so many people have been working remotely, I've been asking the question about whether or not people are relying more and more on email as a primary form of their communication. Now, I've got a lot to say about email, and those of you who've heard me talk in the past know that. And I'm not going to really get into that so much, except to ask people to consider with regards to email. And I'm not anti-email, I get it. It's efficient. It's a good way of communicating, especially to a group of people. But does every email that we receive require an email response? Or are we better served sometimes by just picking up the phone and having a conversation or setting up a meeting on Teams? Because, and you all have seen this, I'm sure, I've seen so many times where there are these long extended email chains where someone maybe misinterprets something or somebody wants to chime in. And now we have this, 10, 20 long emails, which could have all been resolved if we just sat down, had a teleconference, connected by Teams. We have all of this technology at our disposal. So even if we are physically distanced from one another right now because of the pandemic, we don't have to be, even though this is the term that they use, socially distanced. We have other ways of interacting with one another and still creating those connections, which I think people appreciate, because these things are going to determine how we relate to one another. They are going to determine our appropriate behaviors. And the second to last one on the right side there, it's going to decide how power and status are allocated. And as the kids say, are we staying in our lanes? Or do we even know what our lanes are? Are they well defined? And these things matter because none of us likes to feel as though someone is encroaching in our lanes or taking over power or responsibilities that haven't been designated to them. We all have something to bring to the table with regards to the county. We all have roles and responsibilities, and we need to respect that, because this is going to guide our day-to-day working relationships. So where does it start? How does it begin? And I think it really does begin with our hiring practices. And I mentioned that the county is about to undergo a significant change in its workforce. And what I mean by that is, based on the numbers that I've heard, and I'm sure many of you have heard these as well, up to 50% of the county's workforce is going to become retirement eligible within the next 3 years. Now, if you think about that for a moment, that is an awesome number. That means up to 1,300 new employees may be entering into the county's workforce between now and 2024. So I think we are at this critical juncture, and I think we do need to be engaging in things like succession planning, identifying those people who right now within the county can be cultivated to take on greater and greater roles of responsibility. But equally, we need to be setting the groundwork right now for the behaviors, the expectations that we want to communicate to these new candidates and these new hires. Because our culture is going to be how they get indoctrinated and socialized to the way we feel, the values, the principles that we expect them to share. So each and every one of us, I just ask us to think about how are we modeling our behavior right now for the future, for these newer hires that are going to be coming into our workforce. And I know this is difficult sometimes because I've been on a lot of different hiring panels, and you get the resume or the application and it looks like they walk on water. And then you get them in the interview and everybody's on their best behavior, right? But it's really not until they're on the ground doing the work that we find out what we've got. And it's not just the technical side of things. It's, are they a good fit within the organization in terms of adopting these values and principles and behaviors that are expected of all of us? And I've seen a lot of times where someone will get hired into a group or into an office and they're just not a good fit. And it's not necessarily either side's fault. It's just this individual wasn't able to internalize these shared beliefs and expectations. But this is a two-way street. Are we providing our new candidates, our new hires, with the information about this organization from an ethics standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint, rather than just assuming they're going to pick it up as they go along? So again, I say it is critical that management, people in supervisory roles, establish these behavioral norms now, because whenever I talk to especially newer managers or supervisors, I say your behavior, because of your role, is going to be the most observed behavior, but it is also likely to be the most copied behavior. Because if someone sees a supervisor or manager doing something, they're going to assume that it is appropriate behavior and that it is a part of the culture and that they can do the same things. So we need to be mindful of what type of a bar or a standard or a groundwork are we laying right now for these new people who are going to be entering into our workforce. So I've been talking now for the better part of a half hour and about culture and expectations. And I think the quotations on this slide here really capture the essence of what I'm trying to get at in a much more succinct way. So André Godin, who was a French industrialist, once said that the quality of our expectations determines the quality of our actions. And then Craig Johnson, who is an economist at UC Boulder, said that the misery caused by immoral leaders drives home an important point. Ethics is at the heart of leadership. So whenever I talk about ethics in government, ethics in the workplace, I say it is a top-down proposition. What is the tone that is being set at the top? I think that is critical to our understanding of our ethical culture within the county. And then finally, the quotation from JFK there, where he said there are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction. Now, I mentioned that I've worked in government for many, many years, and I have noticed that there are occasionally those county employees, those government employees, I should say, who will slide into that arena of comfortable inaction. In other words, doing the least amount necessary just to get by. I think we've probably all observed individuals in different agencies that may be like that. Well, let me suggest to you that when we allow ourselves to slide into that arena, we are feeding into those negative stereotypes that many members of the public, that many citizens within the county have of government employees. And these, again, can be government employees at any level. And you know this, right? What are some of those negative feelings that people just sort of inherently carry around with them about government employees? It's things like government employees are lazy. Government employees are incompetent. Maybe at a certain level, government employees are corrupt. So every opportunity that we have to engage, not only with the public, but with each other, is an opportunity to communicate our values, our principles, and to show that we take our roles seriously. We understand that we are a publicly funded organization. Our county relies on taxpayer dollars. And whenever anyone pays for anything, that is going to come with a set of expectations. Now, I'm not saying every expectation of the public is appropriate or proper, but nevertheless, we have to acknowledge that every day our behaviors should be reflective of the public's trust and earn the public's confidence in the county as an organization. And that brings me to this notion of character. Now, when I talk about character, I don't just mean an individual's character. We all have character, we know this. But I also talk about the character of the organization, because I do think there is this notion of organizational character. So at the top there's that traditional saying that goes, character is what we do when no one is watching. And that is a very traditional statement. But I think in the modern era, we can turn that a little bit to say character is what we do because everyone is watching. And I say that for a couple of different reasons. First of all, as you know, because we work for a public agency, we are expected to operate in what they call a transparent environment. In other words, everything that we do, every decision we make, all the supporting documentation, all the emails, everything is up for public inspection and scrutiny. And we need to be mindful of that. And secondly, even when we start returning to a more traditional workspace, whether or not we work in an area where, say, there are cameras or recording devices going on, we need to remember that every member of the public and all of us carry around with us a recording device in the form of our cell phones. And I can say that it is becoming a bit more common nowadays where a member of the public will tape on their cell phone, that's an old term, I date myself with my language, record an interaction or behavior of a county employee that they think is inappropriate, whether they're actually engaging with them or it's just something they see when we're out in the public view. And they will take those recordings and they will send them to a commissioner or a county manager or a DCM, or sometimes they'll just post them on social media. And even if these things aren't necessarily accurate, even if they lack context or completeness, they're going to form an impression. And these are impressions that we have to deal with. We have had circumstances where someone has posted a video on YouTube that involves county employees, and it goes viral, and now all of a sudden it becomes a media story, and we have to deal with that. We have to think all the time as though, especially in our professional roles as county employees, we have to operate as though we are being recorded all the time. because these things can become media stories. And I'm not giving the media a free pass here. I do not believe that media is a true and accurate reflection of reality. They have their own interests with regards to the stories that they print or broadcast, whether it be a particular political or social view or even their own commercial interests. But nevertheless, they form impressions. And I think you all can appreciate right now, especially, that these impressions can become just as important as reality. And to be fair, the only thing that the public and all of us have to assess the character of the county on are those things, those external actions and decisions. So this is what we learn about each other, but it's also what we learn about ourselves. And so what I'm asking people to consider is to make sure that what we say does not conflict or confront what we do. Because again, the news media, you can look at any source, are filled with stories every day about individuals or organizations that have failed to meet a set of expectations. And I mean, you can think of your own examples. One just somewhat recently, you may have been following the stories concerning the governor of New York and all of those allegations that have been alleged against him with regards not only to inappropriate behavior, but also actions that he may have taken with regards to handling the pandemic. So our character does tend to be and is tended to be believed to be the most accurate reflection of our true motivations. So we're going to now sort of turn to talking about qualities of good leaders and leadership. And I don't want people to really be so hung up on whatever your title or your designation is, because I think everyone has a leadership role to play with regards to ethics. But let's just take this slide here and these two contrasting concepts, one of leadership and the other of brinksmanship. And leadership, as the slide indicates, is the art, and it is an art, of motivating people to act towards achieving common goals, as opposed to brinksmanship, which is the art of pushing confrontation to the limit of safety to force a desired outcome. It is the bullying, oppressive, hostile type of behavior where someone with a title or authority is simply trying to force someone to do something just to get their own way. But I think we can all appreciate that those folks in our lives, whether our personal or our professional lives, who we have considered to truly be leaders, we have felt as though we have been persuaded to follow them, that we have been asked to get our buy-in and to become a part of a collective effort, as opposed to those who engage in brinksmanship, where it feels forced or coercive or dictatorial. The one feels like success, the other feels like misery or drudgery or simply failure. These are the people we do not necessarily respect, who do not inspire our loyalty or our trust, and who we simply don't feel motivated to follow. And that leads me to this idea of stewardship, because I think stewardship is an important leadership attribute. And stewardship involves a willingness to accept responsibility for our people and for our resources, and to do this all the time. And how this plays into our ethics and our ethical choices is, are we taking into consideration the impact that what we do, what we say, what that impact is going to be, not only on the public, but on those around us. So as the slide indicates, good stewards are those who weigh every action or inaction against the effect it's going to have on the workforce, against the input or the data point it is going to have on the culture within our groups and our offices and our departments. I really like this slide because I think it really gets to the heart of what I'm trying to say. It says, no matter how educated, talented, rich, or cool you believe you are, how you treat people ultimately tells all. And this speaks to our integrity in our decision making, in our actions, in our language, because everything we do, I can say it has an ethical consequence, and it does, but it also has an impact and uh, a feel, if you will, as to how we as a group treat one another. So, what is leadership, or in our view, good leadership? And at the top there, you can see it's about setting goals. I mean, that seems fairly obvious. We all know that. But it's also about lighting the path, creating a roadmap. How are we going to get from where we are to our endpoint, to our goal? And then, and this is really important, persuading, communicating other people to follow along. No one appreciates just the, okay, here's our goal. Now everybody go figure it out. Just go do that. That's not leadership. That's just laying down an ultimatum or dictating something and then walking away. Leaders have to learn to negotiate alliances. And you all know this as well as any other department. The county has 32 different departments within its organization, within its umbrella. And each one of those departments has a different mission and a different goal, but they also have different subject matter experts. And these are people who we should be reaching across departmentally to build these alliances, to work collaboratively, to help and support our own projects, because this does a couple of different things. Number one, it avoids duplication of efforts. If someone's already invented the wheel, there's no need for us to invent the wheel. So why not reach out to those folks who might have already gone down the path we're about to go down? But also, it helps to make sure that our ambitions and our goals are in line with the needs of the county as an overall organization. So what this entails is not only having the vision, but the ability to communicate that vision effectively so that people will feel persuaded and motivated to follow. It requires, I think, obviously the ability to organize things in an effective and an efficient manner. And it also involves balancing what they call conflicts of interest. And I want to spend a moment here because I think it's important that people understand what we mean by conflicts and to believe that they really do exist. Because I think many times when people think about conflicts or they hear the term conflicts of interest, they think in sort of narrow terms. They think only in terms of, oh, you're just sort of talking about how the county awards money and things like that. But it's actually can be much broader than that. And the Code of Conduct has a very fully formed and fleshed out section on conflicts of interest. It's many paragraphs long, and it goes into a great amount of detail with regards to both what they call material and non-material conflicts. But the way I ask people to think about these things is to consider this. As we've been talking about throughout this afternoon, we all know we have roles and responsibilities as county employees. But we also have other roles in our lives because we are attached or associated with other institutions, such as our family or our politics or our neighborhoods or our cultures or our religions. And each one of these other roles that we have in our lives carries with it a different or a separate set of responsibilities. So the question I would say people should ask or to think about is those moments where our roles as county employees intersect with some other role we have in our lives, therein lies a possibility for a conflict of interest. And let me give you a very simple example. It's a real world example that happened to me several years ago. And some of you who've heard me talk before may have heard me use this one, but I think it really illustrates the point, which is I received a phone call from a director several years ago. And they told me that they'd just gone through an interview process hiring for a position in their department. And it turns out that one of the people that they had placed on the interview panel was the fiance of one of the applicants. Okay, I think we can all see the issue there. And they could too. And I wasn't quite sure how it kind of got that far down the road, why this person hadn't raised their hand and said, oh, by the way, this person that we're going to be interviewing, we're going to engage in wedded bliss or whatever. But nevertheless, they saw the issue. And I told them, well, in my view, my recommendation to them would be that they reform their interview panel, that they take the fiance off, that they recall the applicants, that they re-interview, rescore, and make their hiring decision based upon that. And I said that for a couple of different reasons. I said that not only because the integrity of our decision-making processes, whether it's hiring, awarding contracts, and the like, it needs to be beyond question. It needs to be beyond reproach. But as well, keep in mind that transparent environment that we operate in, so that all of the supporting documentation that goes into the decisions that we make, whether it be hiring, contracting, etc., these are all up for public view. And it's not uncommon that an unsuccessful applicant or a bidder on a contract will request to see their credentials, the resume, the application, the proposal of the successful applicants. And I think that has to be in part because they are looking for some flaw in our decision making. And the consequences of this stuff is very real. These are the things that lead to bid protests or grievances, and they have the potential for erasing all of the effort that we put into these decisions that we make. And so I just emphasize this because if you think that you or one of the people on your staff may have a potential conflict of interest, that's a good time to give our office a call so we can have the conversation, so we can help to guide you through what the code says, whether it may in fact represent a potential violation of the code of conduct, and how you can address it before, again, you get far down the road like they did with the example that I gave you. So some lessons that we can take away in trying to guide and be a leader with regards to our ethics. And one is to be supportive, but also to hear one another. Because when I say hear one another, I don't just mean listen to the words that are being spoken or typed. Look at those other things, because people communicate in lots of different ways, not only with words, but with tone, inflection, body language, all of those nonverbal cues that have a communicative value, because we may be expected at times to stand up for those people who may feel as though they're being pulled in opposite directions or receiving cross pressures and feeling as though they have no choice, or that they are being forced or coerced into a situation that they know is going to lead to either a bad or an unethical decision. As the old saying goes, are we willing to speak truth to power? And again, I'm a realist, or at least I try to be. I've worked in government for a long time, and I know there are those moments where we are going to encounter cross pressures, where we will be pulled in different directions by either different directors or people who are in a position of authority above us, and we will try to be encouraged or leveraged into doing something that we simply know to be wrong, whether it be against policy or our practice or the code or what have you. And I just ask people to remind themselves that each and every one of us has our own independent professional judgment within the areas that we work in. Now, we should not give those things up. We shouldn't abdicate our professional responsibilities and judgments, because when we do, it may lead us down a path not only of making an unethical choice, but it also may take us down a road where people feel as though we can easily be turned or bent to their will if enough pressure is applied to us. The quotation at the bottom from Lao Tzu there, I think, is an important one, where he said, to lead people, walk beside them. As for the best leaders, the people do not notice their existence. When the best leader's work is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. And so I think I want to do one more slide here, and then I'll ask if people have any questions or comments, and we'll take a quick break. But I think these numbers on the slide are telling, and I want to be clear here. These are not county numbers. These are some national survey numbers that we found, and they are pre-pandemic, although I think it would be interesting to see if they would still hold up in the pandemic. But let's just walk through them quickly. First one says 75% of employees that were surveyed, and again, this is across the country, reported their boss is the worst and most stressful part of their job. 65% said they would take a new boss over a pay raise. I think that's telling. And 50% said they don't feel valued by their boss and plan to look for another job in the next year. And I think it's that last number there that really speaks to something. I think it speaks to a very common human desire of employees and employees of any organization that everybody has. And it's the desire to feel valued, but it's also the desire to feel as though they are adding value, that they are making a contribution, and that their contributions are being acknowledged. And so Beth Rivas at the bottom there said, power isn't control at all. Power is strength and giving that strength to others. A leader isn't someone who forces others to make him stronger. A leader is someone willing to give his strength to others that they may have the strength to stand on their own. And this is going to lead us into talking in the next section about some ideas with regards to empowerment and humility and other qualities or attributes of good leaders. But this presentation, these slides are just intended to put these ideas in front of you and hopefully give you something to sort of think about, meditate on, and consider as to whether or not there's some value here and things we all might be able to incorporate into our daily practices. So with that, I've been going about almost 50 minutes here. So let me take us off of share screen just for a moment. And we'll bring up my camera here real quickly. And before we take a break, I just want to ask or invite people, if you have any questions, comments, reactions to anything that I've talked about so far, anything that's resonated with you, please feel free to go ahead and unmute your microphones and let's talk about it. So I'll be quiet for a minute and feel free to make any contributions you'd like to.
So, Robert, as those numbers that you showed were pretty startling, that 50% or 65% of people would take a better boss over a pay raise. What is a good way to open up, as I'm a direct supervisor for 4 people here, what's a way to ask that without, or to ask for constructive criticism, I guess?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good question. And I think in part it's to, engage with people, to show that you have an interest in their input and to show that, and doing it in a way that's not confrontational, that's not, if you have a suggestion, if you have a way of thinking about how we're doing as a group, myself as a supervisor, as a manager, let's talk about, have the conversation, in other words, and listen to the input. And that doesn't mean that necessarily everything that someone may say is something you want to necessarily incorporate, but at least it kind of gives you an insight into their thinking. And I think, again, it gets back to kind of figuring out what the tone is within the group. And what the perception is of our team, if you will, and how things are going, how we're moving forward, if you will. So I mean that's one idea, is to just ask the question and to observe what the answers are and what's coming from people and see if there's any sort of consistency with regards to that and something you might want to take away and consider adopting. So those are kind of my thoughts.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, I guess what you're saying is that, or what I'm kind of understanding is that if the response is kind of a cold, no response, then maybe that also speaks volumes, right? If they're not comfortable
Exactly.
expressing that also speaks to the mood.
Exactly. And
So I can appreciate that.
yeah, and that is in another training that I do. I talk about a book that was written called The 7 Signs of Ethical Collapse. And one of the 7 signs is what they call fear and silence. So if people are afraid to speak up, if people feel uncomfortable with that, I think you're exactly on point. That is an indicator of something of the culture of the or environment of the group and the office. And again, you know, I don't pretend that I am by any means the Uber manager or anything like that. I've just done some of this stuff for a long period of time. And these are conversations that I invite folks to have one-on-one with either myself or Rachel so that we can sort of talk through things, because many times I get sort of the other side. I get employees who will come to me and say, I don't know how to communicate with my manager. And it's not that they don't like their manager, it's just they don't know how to effectively communicate with them. And so we can talk about that, and I can kind of give them some suggestions about some techniques or practices that might help, as they say, break the ice and establish those stronger working relationships. So those
Right
are
on.
my thoughts. Okay, cool. Anybody else have anything? Those of you on camera, I see you're shaking your heads. So maybe you're just ready for a break. That's fine. So let's see. Why don't, I'm going to round up a little bit. Why don't we say it's about 3:25? So let's be back here at 3:30, and we'll pick up the second part of the presentation. So I'll see you in about 6-7 minutes. So see you in